Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another show. Hi, Barry.
Hi, Del. It's good to be in this interesting conversation today.
Yeah, I know. I was just telling Barry that I just finished reading a book that was recommended for me because most of my work is with people that suffer from codependency, low self-esteem, recovering from narcissistic abuse, and stuff like that. So anyway, I was being interviewed, I think it was 2 weeks ago, by somebody, and on this subject, and she recommended this book for me, and it's called Fake. And it's by a woman. Let me make sure I get my things right here. Stephanie Wood, and Stephanie Wood was a journalist in Australia, and I'm not quite sure how old she was, but she was definitely sort of in her, I think, late 30s or early 40s, and she met this really lovely, unassuming man, this country gentleman who was a farmer and just the salt of the earth, and had 2 children and had an awful ex-wife who had put him through hell and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, bottom line is she gets into this relationship with this man. And she's, after about, I think almost 18 months together, it was one of those relationships where things just weren't adding up. There always seemed to be this last minute thing that came up that she couldn't meet his family, she couldn't see where he lived, there was always a good plausible reason, and there was always a drama in his life but he would do these things where he wouldn't just sort of like say, no, I can't show up at anything. One instance was there was a wedding that they were supposed to be going to, and in front of her he booked his tickets to the wedding, and she booked her tickets to the wedding. And on the day that they were going to this wedding, or the day before, when they were supposed to be meeting at the airport and flying, she gets this phone call saying, oh, my son's just been rushed to hospital and he can't come, and I'll get the next flight out. And this whole drama sort of played out over 2 days. And then apparently there was a storm and he couldn't get out of Sydney, and all this stuff was going on. And then she called the airlines and said, why were the planes delayed? And they're like, what are you talking about? No plane was delayed. And she was like, well, wasn't there a fire? And they were like, no. And then she said, well, this person was supposed to be on this flight and couldn't get on. And they're like, we're not allowed to say who's on the flights or not. But anyway, this type of thing went on and on and on. And so what we're talking about today is fantasists. People, it's beyond the normal sort of narcissistic gaslighting. It's people that actually create a fantasy life. It's a very, very deep, damaging psychological condition that can have horrendous ramifications. Some people do it because they just have such low self-esteem that their lives they feel are so boring that they have to create these fantasies. Some people do it because they intentionally, they're psychopaths. They intentionally want to inflict pain and suffering on another person, and they can also do it to get you to give them money. And so it's horrendous. I have been exposed myself to one person such as that, which I'll go into a little bit more in detail later after Barry's chipped in here. Their intention was to, I believe they absolutely hated women. They wanted to see women embarrassed and suffered, and they wanted to steal money from them. Thank God I didn't get involved with this person, but I was on the sidelines and I witnessed it, and I saw the fallout of a lot of people that got very hurt and very damaged by them. So yeah, I'm sure you've come across some stories in your work, Barry, like this.
Well, yeah, and also just in the world. First of all, I'm going to start from this perspective as well. Is that not to put blame anywhere or any particular responsibility, but I know of I know was happening with clients, certainly, and certainly know it has happened with other people I know, where they have almost been looking for the fantasy they couldn't have. So when this person showed up with this made-to-order fantasy for them, they bought it hook, line, and sinker because they want to escape their own mundanity, mundane life. I try to say the right phrase. And it's interesting because there was a movie on Netflix called, a documentary on Netflix called The Tinder Swindler,
Yeah,
and it
exactly.
was about to go to Europe. And he did create a reality, but from a fantasy he started with that convinced these women through the dating app to give him money. So then it created the lifestyle that he wanted to create. So in a way, he used them to get what he wanted. Now,
Yeah,
the thing I want to say is that there are many different, unfortunately, just for those people who haven't heard this before, scams on the dating apps where people misrepresent themselves. So that's one thing which we'll talk about another time. Let's come back to this one because this is real life. This is what people do interactively. And yes, there are, how to say this in a polite way.
why
There are
so
people who don't,
polite now? Go on, Barry. Just spit it out.
people who basically are too afraid of being honest with anybody else that they live in a fantasy themselves. And so on one end of the spectrum, because it sounds like we used to describe this archetype, this type of being, there is a range, there is a spectrum from being like totally predatory and victimizing and dangerous to someone who basically just doesn't know how to be in reality. And I think that's the thing about this
Yeah,
understanding what fantasies are like, is they do have a desire themselves to not be who they think they should be, or who don't want to be who they think they are because they don't think it's good enough or be loved even.
yeah.
So there's a lot of pieces to unpack. I guess I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that definition. And I think we have to be very clear about the perpetrator and the victim, and not
Yes.
sort of get mixed up of who is being victimized. I saw the Tinder swindler too, and I did see that there was they you could come away thinking, you know what, these women fell for it because they were being inauthentic or being seduced by money, and I could see that some people might feel that way, but
Hmm.
there are some people, and certainly in the book I just read, and I think they also did that documentary Dirty John on the man that, again, that was a fantasist who tried on a dating app, um, tried to win over this woman. She was an interior designer, and he wasn't living a flashy life. He wasn't seducing her with money at all. She really genuinely he knew exactly what she wanted to hear. And and I'll say it, I think society sets a lot of women up for this. I think this whole thing, we did a show on it already about the fairy tale, the fantasy. And I think there are certain women at a certain age, if they haven't met the love of their life, or haven't had children, that they want children, they want that life, that sometimes they might overlook certain red flags. And they're not looking for glamour, they're not looking for money, they're looking for a loving partner that they can spend the rest of their life with, that they can raise a family with. So we really have to be clear that it's not everybody gets sucked in because they think they're going to have a better lifestyle. It could simply be that they're hungry for love, hungry for commitment, hungry for a family. And I agree with you. Going back to the perpetrator, some of them are just so severely damaged, and we don't know what has gone on in their life or their circumstances where they have received the message that just being ordinary and normal and honest and loving and kind is enough. That they
Right.
feel that they have to create this fantasy, this larger than life, I'm a pilot, or remember that movie,
Oh,
Mr.
catch me if you can.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of them. There's millions of references, and
It's true.
that they have these fantasies. There was also one I think I saw on this heart surgeon who actually was a heart surgeon, but they were doing a documentary on him, and the woman that was, I think, working for one of the major networks did a documentary on him, and she ended up falling in love with him, and he concocted this whole story, and that they were going to get married, and he was already world famous, and he was a surgeon, but he concocted this whole story that they were going to get married by the Pope, and they were going to have this lavish wedding, and they were doing. But it's just such a sickness where you I mean, we know that narcissists lack empathy, but this
Hmm.
is to the extreme. I mean, and again, narcissists gaslight. They deny what you're seeing with your eyes. They would rather you think that you're crazy than them confess to something. But this is one step further. This is creating and manipulating a story, such a complex story, and such a web of lies to really entertain themselves and derive pleasure from the long drawn out suffering they cause.
That's the predatory nature, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. But the
yeah,
thing is, I want to spin on this again. I want to go with the other side because I feel empathy with some of the people who get victimized. But also, let's call them out on this because I'm sure for many people that first date they go on, they're running a fantasy automatically. Most of us do. We sort of look at that. What if this person is the perfect person? What if this is this and all these things happen? And we dress up maybe more than we normally would to look good for that date. So we're actually creating, in some sense, I'm just being clear about this fairy tale fantasy meeting of these two people. And the challenge is when we go past that point to the second, third, fourth date, we have to come back down to reality, so to speak. And some people are loath to do that. And so they want to maintain a level of, well, pretense to keep the act up so they can maintain that wonderful sense of euphoria and fantasy fulfillment that isn't real, but is what they want to maintain. And I suspect some people fall into that trap rather than full blown, because yes, absolutely, the predatory, um, vampiric nature almost of this person is one extreme. But also, I think a lot of people fall into the trap because they don't really want to have, as you said earlier, like a normal life with a partner. Because the thing is, some people don't think that love is in is interesting. Most people don't think that love is enough. It needs to be embellished. It needs to be decorated. It needs to be so much more than just two people loving each other. Anyway, so that's another conversation right there too.
yeah. You know what's so interesting you're saying? It's like, but again, as I said, this woman fell in love with what she thought was an ordinary man, not a
Yeah,
flashy man. I mean, somebody that apparently wasn't even that attractive in the beginning. It was like an okay man, but what happens is these people are so adept at picking up what the other person's vulnerability is, what the other
hmm,
person wants. And yes, if the other person says, I want a glamorous lifestyle, then they'll start, fictionalizing this, how glamorous they are. But if
right.
there is somebody that's really just looking to be loved and in an ordinary, I mean, this man pretended to be a very ordinary man, a good father, a sheep farmer who, would bring her sheep, for her garden. We're talking about very basic things here. We're not talking about seduction with
Right.
with glamorous things. But the other thing is, I mean, this book was just fascinating for me because she said also that you can Google things like, and I Googled this morning just to see what came. You can Google things like, you know, what are the 10 best lines to get somebody to fall in love with you? What are the 10
Ooh,
best ways to get a woman in bed with you? What are the 10 best ways? And they're all there on the internet. This is what you
yep.
see. You mirror them, you pick up this, you pick up that, you tell them, you validate what it is that you sense. If you're clever, if you're manipulative, you know so
This
clearly what somebody wants to hear.
so that piece alone. I'm sorry. This wrote a whole bunch of stuff for me. Back in the late '80s, early '90s, I think it was. There was a whole for the men. There was a whole industry of men teaching other men to be pickup artists, and this was what the mechanics was the right lines to say, the right way to act, the way to be. Maybe I'm not going to say it happened this way. However, perhaps some of these men who, and so I know women do this too, but some of these men who became fantasists were sourced from that resource because they knew that they couldn't do it themselves. The thing is, and I know some of these guys who did that business, they were the pickup artist teachers. And they said that most of their audience were very average men who just felt like they were getting left behind. And they wanted to be able to stand out from the crowd. And this vehicle they used, this methodology of becoming savvy with the lines, to actually have manipulative ways of saying things that get women into bed, because that's what it was. It was about getting sex. It wasn't about relationship necessarily.
Oh, you've just hit on something. Have you when you finished, I just want to go back to that. But
I saw that look in your eyes, absolutely, because I was so, to be blunt, I was wasn't livid, but I was so frustrated watching that happen because I've and I said this before from the beginning. I've been a passionate devotee supporting the feminine for most of my life without realizing it, and very clearly from 2007 onwards. And so watching this manipulative methodology being taught really infuriated and frustrated me because I know how much women have suffered from this. So that manipulation and that way of men learning the tools to get what they wanted when they may not have done the internal work to be prepared for it.
mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm going down another avenue. You have something you want to jump in on, I feel like.
Two things, actually. Number one, I think I actually interviewed one of those men, and it was, I swear, it was when I worked in TV, and he came in pitching a TV show, and he was one of the, those types of guys. And I swear, I think I felt like I needed a shower after he left the office. I was so disgusted by his machismo. I can get any woman in bed. It's like, oof, get away from me. But anyway, during this book, it was really funny. She talks about a cartoon, this sort of one of those cartoons, and there's the woman's, it's the first date, and the woman's sitting there, and her little thought bubble, well, great big thought bubble is, oh, isn't he so wonderful? Oh my God, he has children. He seems like such a great father. Wow. And she's already, anyway, her thought bubbles are going, and she's basically taken it all the way through to they're going to be married, they're going to have their own kids together because he's such a great father. And his thing is, this is going well. I think we're going to have sex at the end of the night. His thought bubble. So basically showing the difference that, women do tend to go more into not all women, I certainly have not found myself in that category particularly. But I would say, generalization, most women are looking for the fantasy of the whole thing, the marriage, the family, the children, the unit, the companionship, all that wonderful stuff. And I think men in general, and I don't tend to generalize that much, you and I butt heads on this one a lot with the feminine and masculine, but, I don't think as many men fall into that fantasy. Having said that, when I watched that, I swear I had men that wanted to propose over lunch, the first lunch you'd ever had, and I'm like, what is wrong with these men? It's like, you don't know me, but I did encounter some men that wanted to move very, very fast as well. So
yeah, that's the thing is, it isn't black and white, like one gender, not the other gender. There is an overlap, certainly in this case. As I said at the beginning about how some people wanted to escape their own mundanity, so they almost fell into the fantasy as their own escape from it. And this person who presented to them was an exit from that in a way that wasn't healthy. The thing, the chat, and it's funny because when you were talking about you interviewed some guys, I wonder who it was because I know a couple of these guys in the field too. So it might have been the same person. I don't know. Anyway, that's an offline conversation. We'll have another time.
No, ego that was so big that he thought the whole television show should be about him and how he teaches men how to get women into bed. Right. This is a little one-tracked.
I hope we're past that point now as society. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I certainly hope we're no longer stuck in that one. It was horrible. Anyway, getting back to this piece, that this conversation we're having is part of it is that so many people unfortunately don't really know who they are, that they're so looking for whatever it is out there, whether it's their career or it's a relationship or it's their awakening, whatever it is they're looking for. And so when somebody provides that shining light for them that they think is the answer, they almost trip over themselves getting caught up in it rather than going, let me just check inside for what's true for me. Because most people, frankly, I wish we all did. And you and I do, but a lot of people don't. Is that it's almost like having the inner truth detector. Like we can lean into something, see if it's good, then we can feel inside and go, that's real, that's not real. But a lot of people don't have that. And yes, society, our culture certainly has impacted most people's self-awareness by all the inundation of commercials and things that they're telling you have to have this, this, and this to be happy, versus just be happy first. And so this conversation, I know that's a bigger picture of it, the idea, but the reality is the fantasists, they thrive on finding people who don't have clarity of who they are. I mean, if somebody knows who they really are, wouldn't be caught up by this. But unfortunately, most people aren't, and so they do become victims of this.
Yeah. Well, it's true. I think I think sometimes, I mean, I know somebody personally that got caught up in something like this. And, my fear is she was beating herself up because she was saying, well, I got greedy. I fell for a scam. But
Yeah.
it wasn't just a money scam. It was a romance money scam. And, we're around the same age. And it was, there was a double fantasy. One that
Mm-hmm.
you could be, invest this money with me and you can have more money. And number two, the chance at love in our 60s. And so it was a double whammy. And I'd love to talk on another show actually about how to recover from this and how to deal with the shame that you feel once you've been on the receiving end of this type of deceit. But what I was also going to say is, for me, I know personally, I mean, that's why I got into narcissistic relationships. My self-esteem was so low that I was an open book. I mean, I seriously, you didn't have to be very bright to manipulate me. It was written all over me. My heart was on my sleeve. It was like, just say nice things to me and tell me that I'm a nice person, I'm a good person, and I'm worthy, and I'm lovable, and I'm yours. And so many of us have had sort of, dysfunctional childhoods where we weren't validated, where we don't know our worth, and we do look for outside validation. And that makes us, unfortunately, so vulnerable to the charm, the seduction, the lying, the deceit, everything that comes in there. And I remember my therapist saying to me very clearly, like, stop listening to words, look at actions. Because I
Yeah.
truly was responding to the words. You only had to say the right thing to me. Well, even I'm sorry, because like saying I'm sorry to me meant everything's wiped clean. Let's start from the beginning again. I'm not going to remember anything. Clean slate. And no, you have to look at behavior. You have to, if something doesn't feel right, if your wisdom is saying to you, it's not adding up. And again, as I say, I hand up first one. I had evidence right in front of me, and
Right.
I chose to believe the lies that I was told above my instincts, which were screaming, this is
Mm-hmm.
not true, this is not right. And somehow, call it denial, call it whatever you want, I believed their words over my intuition and my instincts. And and I don't beat myself up for it. I think to myself, I did the best I could. I
Yeah.
at that time, that's the best I could do. These days, very different story. I'm a very different person now. But
Well, that's the thing is I mean, hindsight 2020 sort of thing is like you have that gift now of seeing what happened and not never and knowing for yourself you'll never do that again.
mhm,
This is, I mean, there's so many pieces that come up like which one to jump in on. For me, this has been interesting because I have a friend of mine who have known peripherally in a way because she was in a relationship with a friend of mine, and I know enough about him to almost wanted to run up to her and try to interrupt her desire to be with him before it happened, but I couldn't do that.
mhm,
So they went through a relationship, it was very tumultuous. And the thing is that it's interesting as you've been explaining what fantasists are. I could see that in him,
mhm,
that he did present an illusion of what he really was, but he kept failing. Not only that, but he was also wrapped in an abusive person too. So when he was around her, she got hurt, which is even harder. But
mhm,
watching that relationship unfold, she is thankfully free and clear. She won't go back. She knows better now because again, 2020 hindsight. But to watch, and I mean, she's a model. She's gorgeous. She's smart. She's a spiritual path. She's such a great woman, and so she would be a great catch for him. And he was a good-looking guy. Excuse me, he is a good-looking guy. As he was. But the thing is that it was such an illusion because what she was really looking for wasn't there.
mhm. Yeah.
But the presentation made it look like it was. And so she fell into that trap. And so I did watch that happen. And I didn't clock it until you were talking about this, that really that could have been a fantasist presentation that he presented that she fell into. And it's interesting because the community that he's involved with, that I'm involved with, he's been very much on the periphery since that happened. Like almost like he's been found out,
Mm-hmm.
and so he's only showing up right at the back end of meetings. He's showing up very occasionally. He's not in like he was before. So I'm not sure if maybe he's realizing that he has to shed that game. I don't know. I mean, I can hope, I guess.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because some people are aware that they're playing the game, and they're aware of when the game is up and when they
Yeah.
need to retreat or maybe go, find fresh fodder somewhere else. Some of them are so completely out of touch with reality that they actually believe their own fantasy, and they will go to and I'm thinking of actually some people, famous people, who, or even politicians. I mean, my goodness, I mean, this my mind is blanking. Is it DeSantis, the politician that was?
George Santos out of New York.
Yes, exactly. Creating this whole fantasy life of.
Oh, yeah, that's right there. That's yes.
Right there. And I would say there's an actual part of him. The fact that he has no sort of remorse or no embarrassment threshold,
Shame. That sort of thing. Yeah.
shame, that actually totally believes that that this whole fantasy he's written about himself. And
Well, actually, I want to just stop there for a second, because I remember a video clip where he was being pursued through the halls at Congress by a reporter, and it looked like he got shaken by him.
yeah,
So I don't know if he's really so convinced himself of it, or more that he's holding up. It's kind of a house of cards. That he's got the structure pretty good, but one blow from the wrong direction and it falls down. And it felt like that happened to him. So I don't know if he's really so in it that he can't be convinced out of it. I think it's still a facade. It's a shell, not a complete representation. Perhaps.
I think there's moments where as you say, the house of cards gets really wobbly, and the shell gets so thin that you almost think it's going to crack. And then you know what? The walls go back up again, and the fantasy sets in, and they pull themselves back. So yeah, it's a fascinating, but again, we have to keep looking at. I'd love to go into another show and talk about how to recover from this, how to handle this, and things like that. But for right now, just as we end this show, I just want to end it on the fact of, if things aren't adding up, they don't add up. Don't go going in there and filling in the gaps and making excuses. If you have not seen, if somebody hasn't invited you to their house or where they live, and you've been together for 6 months, that is a red flag. I actually believe that, especially with young children, I don't actually believe that you should meet young children in the first 6 months anyway. I think, I just think that can be chaotic for children to keep seeing a string of different dates coming through. So I think meeting children is not a red flag, even though some people think it is. But meeting friends, meeting workmates, extended family, parents, siblings, things like this. If you are being isolated from all of these people, then major red flag.
Yeah.
And yeah, if it doesn't add up, it's because it doesn't add up.
Right. It's like, if it doesn't add up, you're not bad at math.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I think this is a great place to end it. Yeah, I highly recommend anybody out there watch. Sometimes it can be really terrifying, but watch things like The Tinder Swindler, Dirty John, and definitely read this book. I think it's a fascinating read. She, part of her recovery was because she was a journalist, was to write a story about this person she'd met. And she got so many other women writing to her, and some men. Some men have also been taken. It just seems to be more women that seem to be the victims of these types of characters. But so many. So you're not alone, and there is no shame. And I really clearly want to say that, like I said, I have zero shame about how I was manipulated and deceived. So please have no shame. But no, and again, tune in. We're going to do a show on how to recover, what it is we can do to make sure this never happens again.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody. We will see you next week.
We'll see you again. Take care.
We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.